In a small quiet village in the Philippines, an old man named Mang Ernesto woke up before sunrise as he always did. The soft crowing of roosters filled the cool morning air while a faint orange glow touched the sky. He sat up on his bamboo bed, stretching his tired arms. Every bone in his body reminded him of the years spent bending, hammering, and sawing wood. His tiny workshop stood beside his home, made of weathered bamboo and rusted tin. Inside it smelled of sawdust and memories. Mang Ernesto was 65, a carpenter who had built hundreds of chairs, tables, and doors for people who could barely afford to pay him. Yet he never complained. He believed that his work, though simple, made life a little better for others. As he prepared his tools, he began humming an old Filipino love song. Music was his comfort, his escape from loneliness. His wife Maria had passed away almost 10 years ago, leaving behind silence that even the chirping birds couldn't fill. Sometimes, when the wind blew softly, he felt as if she was still around, smiling at him from the doorway. His only daughter, Lee, worked abroad as a nurse in Dubai. She called often, but it wasn't the same. The sound of her voice made him proud and lonely at the same time. One day, while fixing an old wooden cabinet for a neighbor, he found something hidden behind it, an old, dusty guitar with one broken string. His heart skipped a beat. It was his guitar, the one he had used to serenade Maria when they were young. He gently wiped the dust away, his hands trembling. The wood was cracked, the sound hole chipped, but the memories were still alive. That night, he sat outside his home under the stars, holding the guitar like an old friend. When he strummed the first chord, the sound was rough but full of emotion. His voice, though shaky with age, carried deep warmth as he sang their favorite song. A neighbor passing by stopped and listened, filming the moment on her phone. The next morning, the old man didn't know that his simple song had traveled far beyond his village. The video was uploaded to social media, and within days, it went viral. Millions of people around the world were moved by the singing carpenter. His voice, raw and heartfelt, made people cry. He received hundreds of comments from strangers thanking him for reminding them that love and dreams never grow old. When his daughter called, crying with joy, he could hardly believe what was happening. His peaceful, forgotten life had suddenly become the talk of the internet. A few weeks later, a thick envelope arrived at his door with a golden seal. It was an invitation from America's Got Talent, asking him to audition in Los Angeles. Mang Ernesto thought it was a prank. Why would they want an old carpenter like me? He said, shaking his head. But his neighbors insisted it was real. His daughter confirmed it over the phone, her voice trembling with excitement. She flew home to help him get a passport and visa. The whole village gathered to celebrate, bringing gifts and blessings. They sold some of his handmade furniture to help pay for his travel. For the first time in years, Mang Ernesto felt nervous but alive. On the morning of his departure, he packed his small bag and his old guitar. Before leaving, he knelt in front of Maria's framed photo and whispered, "I'm going to sing for you, my love." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he locked his door one last time. The flight was long and tiring, and the airport lights of Los Angeles blinded his eyes. Everything felt strange, the tall buildings, the busy streets, the foreign voices. Yet deep inside, he carried the same humble faith he had always lived by. As he stepped out into the American sun, clutching his guitar, he smiled and said softly, "Let's show them what a carpenter can do." The big day arrived, and Mang Ernesto stood backstage at the America's Got Talent studio, his old guitar held tightly against his chest. He could hear the loud applause from the audience as the act before him finished. His heart pounded in his chest like a hammer against wood. He had never stood before such a huge crowd in his life. A young stage assistant smiled at him and said, "You're next, sir." He nodded slowly, took a deep breath, and whispered a small prayer. When the curtain lifted and the lights hit his face, he squinted under the brightness. Thousands of eyes looked at him, and for a second, he thought of running back home to his small village. But then he remembered Maria's smile and the promise he made before leaving. Simon Cowell leaned forward, studying the old man with curious eyes. "Hello, sir," Simon said, "what's your name, and what do you do?" Ernesto's voice was quiet but steady. "My name is Mang Ernesto, sir. I am a carpenter from the Philippines. I fix broken furniture, and sometimes, broken hearts." The audience laughed softly. Simon smiled and asked, "And what will you be doing for us today?" Ernesto looked down at his guitar and replied, "I will sing. Music has always been part of my soul." He adjusted the microphone, took another deep breath, and began to strum. The first few notes of "You Raise Me Up" filled the air. His voice trembled at first, low and cracked, but as he continued, something magical happened. The emotion in his song reached deep into every heart in the room. The story of his life, his loss, his dreams, all poured through his voice. Tears began to roll down the faces of audience members. Sofia Vergara whispered to Heidi Klum, "Oh my God, this is beautiful." By the time he reached the final chorus, the entire auditorium stood on their feet, clapping and cheering. Mang Ernesto stopped singing and lowered his guitar, tears running down his wrinkled cheeks. He couldn't believe the standing ovation before him. Simon Cowell leaned back, clearly moved, and said softly, that was one of the most genuine performances I've ever heard." Then, with a smile that surprised everyone, Simon stood up and slammed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti rained from above as the crowd screamed in joy. Mang Ernesto covered his face, shaking with emotion, and dropped to his knees as tears of disbelief and gratitude streamed down. The other judges ran on stage to hug him. Simon said, "You remind us that talent has no age and dreams never expire." It was a moment that broke millions of hearts across the world, replayed on every screen and shared endlessly online. Weeks later, Mang Ernesto returned for the semifinals. The old carpenter had now become a global inspiration. Everywhere he went, people wanted to take pictures with him. Yet he remained humble, still waking early, still practicing alone with his old guitar. This time, he decided to perform an original song titled, "Hands of Love," dedicated to his wife Maria. The stage lights dimmed to warm gold, and on the screen behind him, images of carpentry tools, wood shavings, and his simple village flashed slowly. As he sang, his voice carried both strength and sadness. The lyrics told of his hands, hands that built homes, held love, and now carried music for the world. The melody was simple, yet every word came from his heart. The crowd listened in absolute silence. When he finished, he whispered, "For Maria." The audience stood again, this time even louder than before. Heidi wiped her tears and said, "I don't just hear your music, I feel your life in every note." Howie Mandel added, "You don't need lights or effects, you are pure soul." Simon, his eyes misty again, said, "You have done something very few people can do. You made the world stop and listen." Mang Ernesto smiled shyly and bowed deeply. As he walked off the stage, holding his guitar close, he whispered to himself, "For her, always." He didn't know if he would win, but at that moment, he realized he had already won the hearts of millions, and that was more than enough for an old carpenter who once sang only to the stars. The grand finale of America's Got Talent arrived, and Mang Ernesto could hardly believe he had made it that far. Standing backstage, he could hear the energy of the massive crowd filling the theater. The lights, the cameras, the sounds of cheering, it all felt unreal for a man who had spent most of his life working quietly in a small wooden workshop. His hands, once calloused from years of holding hammers and saws, now gently held his guitar. He looked at it and whispered, "Let's give them one more song, Maria." The producers had prepared something special for his final performance, a surprise he didn't even expect. As the stage opened, he saw a group of Filipino children walking out, wearing traditional attire, smiling brightly at him. They were part of a children's choir from his hometown, flown in by the show to sing with him. Tears immediately filled his eyes. When the music began, the theater fell silent. Together with the children, he performed the prayer, switching between English and Tagalog. His deep, emotional voice blended with the angelic tones of the young choir, creating a sound that was both haunting and heavenly. The large screen behind him displayed scenes from his village, the tiny workshop, the dirt road, the coconut trees swaying under the sun. It felt like the spirit of his home was standing right there with him. The crowd sat motionless, completely captivated by the sight of an old man who had once been invisible to the world, now shining like a star. When the song ended, there was a brief moment of silence before the entire theater erupted in thunderous applause. People stood, crying and cheering. Sofia Vergara clapped her hands over her heart, her voice shaking as she said, "You brought the world together with your story." Heidi Klum said, "You are proof that the human spirit is stronger than time." Howie Mandel added, "This is why this show exists, to find people like you." Simon Cowell looked directly at him, his voice full of emotion, and said, "You came here as a carpenter, but you reminded all of us what it means to dream again. You made us feel something real." The moment became one of the most emotional nights in AGT history. When the results were announced, Mang Ernesto didn't win the top prize, but it didn't matter. The crowd chanted his name, and Simon walked over to hug him, whispering, "You'll never be forgotten." Social media exploded with clips of his journey. Millions of people around the world called him the Golden Carpenter. News channels from the Philippines to America told his story, an old man who proved that hope never dies. For Mang Ernesto, that was worth more than any trophy or money. When he returned to the Philippines, the airport was filled with people waiting to welcome him. There were banners with his name, flowers, and tears everywhere. His daughter ran to him, crying as she embraced him. "Papa, you did it," she whispered. He smiled, holding her close, and replied, "We did it, Anak." The entire village celebrated his return with music, food, and laughter. Children followed him everywhere, asking to hear him sing. He looked at them and saw himself in their eyes, hopeful, curious, full of dreams. Instead of retiring, he used the small amount of money he earned from the show to build a small music school in his town. He called it Maria's Notes, in honor of his late wife. It became a place where poor children could learn music for free. Every afternoon, the sound of guitars, drums, and young voices filled the air. Mang Ernesto would sit on a small stool, guiding them patiently, saying, "Your voice is your gift. Never be afraid to share it." One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned golden, he sat outside his workshop with his old guitar. The children were singing in the background, their laughter echoing through the air. He strummed softly, playing the same song he once sang for Maria. A gentle wind brushed against his face, and he looked up at the sky, whispering, "We did it, my love." In that moment, he wasn't a carpenter, a contestant, or a viral sensation. He was simply a man who had built his dream with his own hands, and shared it with the world.